Photographers, let's keep going with this. So we got through the all that thinking stuff, all that great thinkers of the past kind of deal that we did last time. Now we're gonna get into some of the easier. Let's just talk about culture, right? Like we got into how some very smart people spoke of culture and what it means and how to compare cultures and all that. Let's just get into it. Let's look at some pictures and make fun of them and all that, right? So, like, what is culture? That is, as Raymond Williams cryptically said, one of the two or three most complicated words in the English language. Yeah, so what is it? Right? And there's no good. I mean, you could get a definition. I'm sure there are plenty of definitions out there that are very nice and one or two sentences and all that. That ain't how we're gonna roll in here. Instead, I want to point out some different examples of how we use culture, describe culture, all of that. All right. So to start with, we got these ladies on the left, these ballerinas. That's culture, right? You guys like the ballet? You down with the ballet, or the opera or whatever? Of course. This is what God I miss. I miss the classroom so much here because it's always so fun to bring this stuff up and see like how many people love the ballet, and like three people raise their hands, because they're trying to look awesome, right? I mean, I would have done it if I were in class and trying to impress the ladies, showing how cultured I am, right? The ballet. Oh, of course, I enjoy the finer things. This is what we would call high culture, or the idea, going back to the Jane Austen Victorian kind of stuff of having good culture that you take into your body, and it's like plant food and it helps you grow properly, right? Nobody likes the ballet. Don't give me that. And this again, I would have like one student who would fight back against that, and I would yell at that student. Nobody likes it. I went to one ballet in my life. It was this Russian thing. They're like supposed to be the best with this stuff, and yeah, they're quite talented. It was the most boring 4 hours of my life. We saw Sleeping Beauty. Uh, it She woke up, right, and there was still like an hour and a half of dancing after that. Like we got to the big finale, and then a bunch of people with mouse heads were dancing around. It was the worst thing in the world, but I'm trying to impress people. I'll bring that up. Oh, Russian ballet. Yes, I've even toured a school, and talk about meeting such people, and I'll do it to impress people. But that's high culture, and as we'll see, that's garbage, right? This idea of some cultural products, art or whatever, some of the stuff we'll get into, the idea that some of it is better than other stuff. That's something we want to fight against. And unfortunately, this, we point to years and years ago, past times where this was the real idea of what culture was. It's still around. We still have this idea. For many of us, we will gladly admit, to watching this movie, but not this other one, right? Like or whatever. It might be whatever that art product might be. So there's this idea of high versus low culture. We're going to push against that. Now on the right, we got the Demon Man. Right there's some culture, right? Some kind of exotic culture. That's where we, it's like the National Geographic kind of stuff, where we, and I say we as typically just mainstream American folk. You can read white into that or not. It isn't exclusively the domain of pasty people, but more just kind of that mainstream American suburban life. We get excited about seeing people like this, where they're in bright colored clothes and doing things that we wouldn't normally do here in our American suburban homes, and the people just look different. It's the idea that they have culture and we don't, right? And I get this all the time from students whenever I have students writing about their culture or trying to discuss this stuff, it's always the thing like, oh, I don't have culture. I live in Lancaster. I just, I'm at home and I go to school and I work over here, and then we like if we want some culture, we go to LA. Right? That's one thing. The idea that to get culture you have to go somewhere, far away, or the people who are all about traveling. All right, don't get me started on that. The travel people, where it's not about going to experience something different. It's more of like collecting these other cultures, right? Collecting photographs that you can show and say, ah, yes, see this culture? I saw it firsthand because I'm a traveler. That's garbage too. All this again, this is all garbage. It's what we think. It's what a lot of people think, but I want to push against it. And what we'll also learn in here is, yeah, there are some cool other cultural things that exist around the world. And honestly, like if you're really, excited about that kind of National Geographic stuff, sign up for Geography 110 here at AVC. That's our world regional geography class. That's where we go around the world. Like we start here in North America and talk about it as a way to frame the rest of the world. And then we move on to, Latin America, and then we'll talk about Europe and Asia and the Middle East and North Africa, and then Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. Right? We just kind of journey around the world and see what these places are like. That's not what we're going to do in here. I'll point to this stuff. We're going to be talking about the greater world, but I also want to focus on this idea that you have culture no matter where you live. And there's actually some pretty amazing stuff going on here in the Antelope Valley, in the greater Southern California region, wherever you're listening to this. There's a lot at work, and it's worthy of study, and so we're going to get into that. So these are two things that we tend to think of: high culture, as opposed to low culture, exotic cultures, and all that. That's why a lot of people will sign up for a geography class. No, we're not going to do that. All right, another thing, another type of culture is this notion of subcultures. All right, this idea of having a kind of dominant mainstream culture, but then within that culture you have other little subcultures. Like which one are we looking at here with this photograph? LGBTQAI plus, like however you want to describe the effect, gay subculture. A lot of different terms in there. How do we know that that's what we're looking at here? It's the rainbow flags, right? That is a sign, like a symbol, right, of this culture and our culture. And knowing that, just if you're aware of these cultural signs, you're able to look at these rainbow flags and go, aha, gay, right? That's or pride, or however you identify with these specific flags. But it's a symbol that shows something. And what I love is we don't want to take this for granted. We don't want to think, that everybody knows this stuff, or get to the point where our own cultural biases kind of cloud other stuff going on. One of my favorite examples of talking about, subcultures, but also how not everybody is clued into this stuff. It took place here in the Antelope Valley a handful of years ago now. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was fair time, right? Time for the Antelope Valley Fair. And everybody was getting excited and talking about it, and in preparation, getting ready for it. All these rainbow flags went up around the fairgrounds, okay? And everybody went, whoa, what's going on here with the fair? Is this a gay fair? What's happening? And what was great is all the people in charge of the fair, they said, what are you talking about? What do you mean a gay fair? What are you getting into? And people said, well, you got the rainbow flag. You put up all these gay pride flags around the fair. And the fair people went, oh, we had no idea. We just thought they were pretty rainbow flags. And then they panicked, of course, and started pulling the flags down. And everybody said, whoa, what are you, homophobic? What's going on? What's wrong with gay people? And the fair people said, oh, nothing. We're not against gay people. So like we wound up having like with the fair, there was like one gay pride parade or great gay pride flag, and then like an American flag, and then like a pirate flag, and just like all sorts of different flags, trying to like not look fully gay, but not look homophobic and all that. And yeah, yeah, and who knew that the rainbow flag meant gay? And it's not like this was in 1974 or something like that. This was in the 21st century, which makes it all the better, right? That people had no clue what was going on. So we've got these subcultures. There are clues as to their existence, and that's a culture that can be studied and see how that's different and similar to the more dominant culture and the relationships between the two and all of that. But we also want to remember that being able to recognize this stuff, that's something learned, and not everybody has that. All right, now culture in general, just kind of generally speaking, really what we're getting at is that it's not something biological, it's something learned. It is the opposite of biology in the sense that it's people teaching other people. Okay? And this can show up in a variety of different ways. In the classroom, like the schools, that is a huge place for cultural reproduction, for passing along cultural ideas. And we might not even think of it that way. We just you learn math and how to read and stuff like that. But that's all cultural, of course, right? Like it's the idea, to learn English in one classroom versus Spanish in another, and Japanese in this one, and Swahili in this one, and so on. That, of course, is cultural, right? What language are you going to learn right off the bat? What is your native tongue? There's also, traditions, things that we do over and over, and you can think we can go right back to school, like elementary school or high school or whatever. I'm thinking elementary school because I'm dealing with my kids, what they're learning and all of that, and they're the story of Thanksgiving comes up, and the some of these tradition things, and you can see too what's really fascinating is seeing how like when I was growing up, we learned the whole Thanksgiving stuff, and we even all of us white kids, because I didn't grow up in a very diverse area. We made you could pick, you could either be a pilgrim or an Indian, and you would make either a headdress, if you wanted to be the Indian, or a little buckle hat thing. And I remember, like, I thought it was so lame that anyone would want to be a pilgrim. I thought, like, what a dreary looking outfit. Like, of course you want to be an Indian. I made the headdress. We actually got in trouble at recess because we started like an all-out Indian assault on some of the pilgrim kids. It was chaos. And I just love the idea, like, you want to talk cultural appropriation and how god awful all this was. But that was the kind of stuff we learned. And now my kids, they're learning the story of Thanksgiving. They're trying to make it a little less like everything was great, and trying to acknowledge that maybe the Indians got screwed once white folks showed up, but not fully doing that. So you can see this idea, like, it's not just that we're taking culture as a thing and sending it out there. It's as I'll get into in a few slides from now. It's a process. We're constantly making and remaking it and trying to figure that out. So that's going on in here, right? What are these stories we tell and so on? But that's like what you learn in elementary school. That's culture. There's a whole lot of culture going on in there, right? So that's what we're talking about. Now we can also get into, it's not just ideas and stuff like that. Technology is a major component of culture, and this is another thing where for some stuff, like when we're doing archaeology, we're studying ancient technology or past technologies or whatever, looking at primitive stone tools and stuff like that. And that's telling us a lot about the culture. Maybe I get hung up on this stuff. I don't know if I've talked about this with you guys. It started out as an anthropology major, and I concentrated in archaeology, worked as an archaeologist for a number of years, and that's why I fight so much against. I always refer to myself as a recovering anthropologist. Moved on from that. The anthropology department here finds that charming. What got me is how like we fixated so much on this exotic culture stuff and this exotic or past or ancient technology, and it felt like we so often missed the stuff that's going on today, right? I think that can be more exciting, like smartphones. That's fantastic, and I feel like nobody has really studied these things, like the cultural side. I mean, sure, we've done studies to see if they give you, tumors if you use them too much and all that stuff. Um, but nobody has really looked at like what these things say about us, or at least I haven't seen anything that looks like this. Like the smartphone, it's incredible, right? That we have all of the knowledge in the entire world just right there that we can put in our pocket and we can pull it out when we have a question. We can get information and not just like look up, how many centimeters are in an inch or whatever, like that kind of fact-based stuff. But we can, if we're questioning whatever it is we're dealing with in the world around us, we can pull up, books and essays and research and all these different things, and we can take it in and we can analyze this stuff. And like, we should be perfect at this point, right? Brilliant and rational and able to have measured discussions and all that because we have smartphones. Except we don't use those for that stuff, right? What do we use a smartphone for? Right, exactly. Taking pictures of our genitals. I think that's the number one thing that people do. We like to document our genitals and send them those said documents to other people, whether they want them or not. And fellas, let me say, just stop. Turns out the ladies don't like that, but that's what we do, right? And you might say, I don't do that, but it's the same. I mean, you don't have to be taking those specific pictures. You also, we don't. Okay, you're a good person. You don't take genital pictures and send them to people who don't want them. Good, you're a good person. But you know what you also do? You put, the dog noses and ears on your face, or you try to figure out what would I look like an old person, right? And so we do that. Let me tell you, as an old person, don't waste your time with that. It shows up soon enough, and you can't undo it. It's terrifying, but yeah, that's what we do, right? Rather than use this for like Star Trek level, utopian good society stuff, we're garbage. But I love that, and that's the thing. Like, what an awful world to live in if we were all rational, well measured and thought out humans acting, in everyone's best interests and all that. Boring. We are just messy garbage, but lovable, and that's what we're gonna get into, right? We're gonna study this stuff and pay attention to this idea of, yeah, sure, a robot would do it this way, but humans don't work that way. And we're going to get into things like epistemology and ideology and how that leads to a lot of this messiness. All right, art is another important thing. That's what we like to focus on. On the left there, who painted that? Oh, come on, you guys don't know? It's Picasso. Come on. And of course, I know that because I did a Google image search for Picasso junk, and this came up, and I liked the blue. Yeah, again, this is that high culture thing, right? And that's one thing that drives me crazy with with geography work, cultural geography work, and other kind of cultural studies stuff. Is there was this real period where everybody was explaining culture through the art you find in art galleries. And I remember, as a student reading through this stuff, and it was just like, what? It didn't connect to me at all. I've been in an art gallery or two in my life. It's not my thing, though. And I feel like for a lot of people, I have nothing against fine art, modern art, that kind of stuff. Some of it looks pretty darn cool. but it's not how I make sense of the world around me. And that's one thing in recent years. I mean, it goes back decades now. This isn't something brand new, but it still seems like we're struggling to get more people thinking in this way. We look at more, pop culture stuff. We got a mainstream media. Comic books are something, and I say that in the actual books themselves, as well as these massive movies that are made, the video games, just all around the massive capitalist culture, mass media stuff around it. But this is just it's just as worthy of study. Like, check Black Spider-Man. My goodness, what a world we live in. Kids, when I was growing up, we just had one Spider-Man. He was a white guy, right? And then there was some discussion of maybe all these white guys running around in their tights, maybe that's not as, inclusive of the readership and so on. And maybe let's experiment with new stories and new ideas. And there was the idea of, like, in one of the many Spider-Man movies that been made, there was an idea of, let's put a black guy in as Spider-Man. And people lost their minds. Right? Black Spider-Man. How dare you, sir? How? Because the idea was you make a Black Spider-Man, and then it's chaos. Fires in the streets, and, cats and dogs getting along. Just nothing would make sense anymore, because everyone knows Spider-Man is white. Spider-Man, the guy who was bit by a radioactive spider and can climb walls and shoot webs and all that. So, the thing that makes perfect sense. Has to be a white guy. Has to be a white guy. That's right there. That's more of this cultural stuff. It's not just the thing itself, but it's our reaction to it, the fights over this stuff. That's the good stuff. So we'll look at some art. In fact, I think I got some actual fine art coming up in this thing to talk about in a moment. But we're gonna spend most of our time in this class, like, when we're talking art, we're talking, Black Spider-Man kind of stuff, right? We're talking about things that that are more mainstream, and we're looking at the cultural stuff there. What does that say about our society, about our culture itself, and what we hold dear, what we are fighting for, things of that nature. Okay, it's also important to remember, and this can tie in with the art as well, that it's not just like what is drawn or created or depicted, whatever, but also the where, right? This is a geography class. We're focusing on this where, and therefore, we're looking at the landscape. We are reading the landscape. Now, Vegas is almost too obvious to look at this stuff, but just the idea of, it's not just a recreation of the Eiffel Tower, but, like, where is that Eiffel Tower, or pyramids, or the New York skyline, or whatever it might be, right? Massive fountains and that kind of stuff. We're interested in where is this stuff taking place. So keep that in mind too, right? As well as the idea of, like, an art gallery, right? The idea that you go into a special place that's where the art is supposed to exist, and you go in and you sit on the bench and you contemplate and all that. That says something about how this art is viewed. That says something about the culture, right? So where? Always going to be looking at the where. Okay, now, as I said earlier, this is not a biological thing. No one is born with culture. No one is given it in their DNA. We're going to see few examples of how people still argue for that, especially when you get into race. It's the idea that depending on your race, which we'll see is a meaningless term. If you actually get down to the genetic level, it's a garbage term. Race. There's no sincere difference in there, but you have plenty of people who are convinced that if you have darker skin, or this whatever characteristic it is, you're just gonna be a certain way. And of course, if you have, like, racial stereotypes and ethnic generalizations and things like that. People will point to those, but it's not that like you have a gene that makes you this way if you are of this certain ethnicity or whatever. It's culture, right? That's just how it works. So we need to stress that quite a bit. And we'll see when I get into race and talk about like the bell curve, this god awful book, this garbage science. We'll see examples of how people still can't figure that out. But I'm going to stress right off the bat, culture is not biological. All right. It's also important to say it's not static in the sense that it's a process. It is constantly changing, and we need to remember that. It's not easy to remember that, but we need to. And this movie here, this picture is taken from, it's the Darjeeling Limited, one of my favorite movies simply because it's such a great study of culture and society in the West and the East and things like that. And I think it's more nuanced and there's a lot going on there than a lot of people give it credit for. But the general idea is you have these wealthy brothers who go to India to try to have like force a spiritual awakening and change their lives and all of that. And of course they're going to India because it's an ancient place and it has this ancient culture and they're so much wiser about this kind of stuff. But they treat these, white American brothers treat this entire continent or subcontinent of India, the entire country, as like existing 4,000 years ago. It gets back to Dorian Massey's idea of space versus time and how we treat people, other people, as not moving forward in time, being frozen in time. When in reality, no, they exist in the exact same time. They just occupy a different space, right? They have a different reality going on, effectively. We can go back to cultural relativism, and historical particularism, the idea that it's not necessarily, better or worse or whatever, but it's just different, right? And of course, people in India, they change, right? Like everybody changes, culture changes, but we tend to, we'll acknowledge that like in our own culture, but we tend to frame other cultures as existing in some past moment and they're frozen and will never advance, forward because clearly, if they were moving forward, getting up to modern standards, they'd look like us, right? Because we are the peak, the pinnacle of cultural advancement. And we know that's not true, but we still kind of think that way. So that's the idea there. Remember, culture changes. And we're seeing that around here. I mean, even like when I started talking about this stuff many, many years ago, my first lecture, I think I had like something about gay marriage in here in terms of like how culture changes. Because it was the kind of deal, like, going like, gay people are getting married. And everyone's like, what? No way. And goes, yeah, totally, but not everywhere. But yeah, now it's the kind of deal. Gay, yeah, if I came in here, oh my God, if I was one of those burnt out professors that doesn't update anything or change anything, and I came in here, I'm like, gay people get married. And I'd wait for you guys to go, no way. But you all go, yeah. Yeah, I know. I am a married gay person, or or whatever. Like it's not a thing today. The issue kind of similar to that, would be trans rights, which is something that's still being battled out. But even this kind of feels like it's no big deal. Like a few years ago, we freaked out, and I say we as like the media landscape and people discussing stuff in this country. It was the bathroom wars, the idea of oh my God, are we going to let those people into bathrooms? And it was, the people against it, a lot of them were framing it as, do you want your daughters in a bathroom with these, someone who was born a man and blah, 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 this whole deal, like framing all transgender people as predators or sickos, whatever. And then you had other people who were like, I don't care. And here in California, we responded with just like, yeah, okay, we'll put in some bathrooms where anybody can go in there, and it'll just be one at a time, and that way you can have privacy, and it'll be nicer for folks, and there you go. But of course, when we did it, what I love, these are two pictures from around the Antelope Valley because I got excited. This is what I do. I love my bathroom pictures. I love the outside bathrooms. If you want to talk about a sicko going into the bathroom, it's the guy who's taking photos, right? Yeah, regardless of his gender and all that. So with this, these were two. I forget exactly where they were, but these were two that popped up, and they used to be seen as they were either family was a term. Was the idea you could go in with your little kid to change the diaper, and mom could also be in there. Well, you're all just kind of juggling all this stuff together. But we switch it to all gender, right? But we still use the iconography of, say, the family. Or I love the idea of putting the person in the wheelchair, this universal handicapped symbol, to mean all genders, right? It makes no sense whatsoever in here, but it's what we do. And again, this is the kind of stuff we can look at and get a sense of where we're at in our culture, how it's changing. We can watch this stuff and really see what's important in society, what isn't important, what's still confusing, what we're still working through. Again, that's reading the landscape, looking at what's around us. How is that culture revealed? Another important question as we are reading the landscape is whose culture are we really seeing, right? Who has the power, effectively, to have their culture be the dominant one, be the one that's represented, right? Versus the idea of whose culture is ignored, right? Or who doesn't have a voice. That's a way to think about it. Who's able to speak through the landscape and who disappears. All right, so here, let's look at some art. All right, let's look at some fine art. So this is a painting from the 19th century. It's called Indian Life at Mirror Lake, and it's Yosemite, generally speaking, and it's a well-known painting of this era from this time. But when you look at that, I mean, it's called Indian Life at Mirror Lake. Is this representing Indian culture, though, of the Yosemite Indians? What do you think? I'm waiting. This is where I could take a break and I could sip my coffee and all that because you guys would be like, "Here's my thought on this or this or that or whatever." What do you guys think? I'm gonna sip my coffee. You just talking to your computer or your phone or whatever. Okay. Did you talk? All right, I didn't hear. Here's the deal. Some people have argued that geographers and other people who study this kind of stuff, that it's paintings like these that kind of erased Indians from the landscape, right? Effectively, even if they're drawn in here. But this was a way to kind of continue this process of getting rid of indigenous Americans so that European Americans could take over. And you say, well, how are you doing that? You're painting this stuff. But it's how these things, these subjects are being painted and displayed and represented and all of that. So yeah, we've got, indigenous people in this area, but they're painted in such a way that they kind of blend in to the natural landscape. And then one argument goes is that Indians were effectively treated like nature. And at the same time, the idea for like white Christian folk, there's this popular notion that God gave nature to people, but it was up to people to improve upon nature. That a truly perfect creation here was one that had been landscaped by humans, specifically European humans. So like going out into the woods, in fact, there's a big period where the idea of like forests and stuff like that, oh, it was garbage. This notion of nature was this wasteland kind of thing, and what you needed to do was go in and fix it. It was almost good but it wasn't perfect, right? And that's what God wanted you to do. So in making the Indians seem like, uh, um, nature, it was a way to say like, yeah, okay, God made these people like He made everything, but we got to get rid of them. We got to make this a more European style landscape. That was the general idea. And by the way, I can't remember where I'm at in this class and other classes I'm talking about. I'm using the term Indian rather than Native American typically. And sometimes people freak out about that. I'm doing it consciously, and that's because with all of the different Indian peoples with whom I've worked, whether as an archaeologist or spoken to or whatever, the vast majority all requested to be called Indian. Um, and it's because basically they said like Native American, that's not that's something a white person decided to label me because it made them feel better, right? And actually, one guy, I loved his argument, was saying, no, call me an Indian, because that's a reminder that Columbus screwed up from day one. Like every time I hear the term Indian, it just reminds me how dumb white people are. And I loved it because it's absolutely true. Like it's hilarious. But so that's why I use that term. And it's the idea, of course, with all of this stuff, the idea of politically correct labels and things like that. We went through a period where people were really against that. That's another cultural process thing where we freaked out about that and then that died down and now people kind of, they bring it back every now and then. But it's the idea with all of these labels, you simply, call people what they want to be called, right? That's kind of the argument. That seems fine. We have that, right? Maybe the name you have on your birth certificate says one thing, but like my name is Michael. No one calls me Michael unless they don't know me. So I always, encourage people to call me Mike because that's what I identify as, right? And we don't, with something like that, it doesn't seem like a big deal where people are like, oh my God, you can't, no, I'm not going to call you that. That's ridiculous. You're Michael. And, and you force something like that's stupid. It's the same thing with terms like African American or Black, Native American, Indian, Indigenous, whatever terms we want, Latinx. It's just the kind of like just call people what they want to be called. So that's why I'm using Indian. That was a long way to say that's why I'm not saying Native American. All right, moving on. So it's the idea that these paintings it was a way to get the native peoples out of the discussion on what to do with the landscape. Everybody kind of agreed that the nature of America needed to be tamed in some way. By making the Indians part of nature, they could be tamed through relocation, reservations, that kind of stuff. Now, some students hear that and they think that's the stupidest thing in the world. This is a painting of Indians. End of story, right? And they look at that, it's a nice painting. And we talk about the quality of the thing, what we're seeing here with this painting. What's great is I started using this to talk about this years ago. And then I read a book by this guy, Mark David Spence. It's called Dispossessing the Wilderness. It's one of my favorite books. It's all about the national park system and how basically how evil national parks are. And he talks about Yosemite and how the Indians there were screwed. I talk about a lot of this stuff in my physical geography class when we talk about Yosemite, the geomorphology part of the class. But it's just all how we've done some awful stuff to erase these people from the space, right? And in this case, not to change nature, but to preserve nature. But to do that, we got to get the Indians out first because they're just going to ruin it with their being there. And then we went in and we paved roads into the thing and all this. Like it just makes no sense, right? But as I'm reading Spence's book, this picture comes up and he explains the artist. She hated Indians in Yosemite. She found them filthy and disgusting and just didn't like. She would paint this stuff, but she wouldn't. She wasn't painting in a way to praise the beauty of the Indians, to capture this culture and all of that stuff. They were there, but they were getting in the way, and so they would be painted off to the side, right? So I mean, that's again, it's this idea of whose culture is being represented. It might be that we think that we're looking at this Indian subject here, and so it's of course it's the Indian culture, but no, that was a white lady who hated Indians who painted this, and so therefore it's not that, right? We're not seeing really the culture of the Yosemite Indians. We're seeing something else altogether. Okay, so that's the whole idea of whose culture is represented here. Another thing we want to think about is, can we leave our culture behind? Can we put it aside to step into the shoes of someone else? And that's a phrase that drives me crazy. I'm going to argue we can't step into the shoes of someone else, and at least not fully. Like, it's good to look at other people, to look at other cultures, to try to get a sense of what they're going through. But this idea of like, oh, I totally get the plight of X, of Y, of Z. No, our culture is a constant thing in which we're using, often for good, but it can just shape every single thing we're dealing with. All right, so like this, I give this example. Like what is this we're looking at? Ask students to explain it. Nobody ever quite gets it. This is a map of the Great Lakes. Lake Superior and Huron and all those lakes up in the upper Midwest area in Michigan and Wisconsin and over there. It's the Great Lakes, right? It's a map. No one sees, and some people say like it kind of looks like a map, but no one sees the lakes themselves in here, or the rivers and all of that stuff, because I'm not teaching this to Ojibwa people in here. It's Antelope Valley people from our very different culture, right? And that's not a bad thing, but it is important to remember that our culture shapes everything, and it can be very difficult to put that aside. And that's okay. We just want to be aware of it. And at the same time, having our culture is a great thing. It's such a wonderful deal. This picture was taken in South Lake Tahoe, I want to say back in 2009, somewhere around there, a while ago now. And so if you can't, it's not the greatest picture because it was on a 2009 era cell phone, and I didn't spend that much money on these things. I think it was my wife's phone here. But this is, we're driving around in South Lake Tahoe. The kids are like with grandma. So we got some freedom. And what are we going to do? We go to an antique store, because my wife wanted to. And sure, why not? We'll go look at old, expensive stuff. Cool. So we pull into this little parking lot area. And over like to the left of this photo is where that antique store was. But as we pull in, I see this sign. It says Patient to Patient Collective. And you've got little dragonflies on it. And then on in the windows, this isn't a reflection or whatever. It's a painting, a mural of beautiful Lake Tahoe and people hiking and riding bikes and stuff like that. And so it's nice art, but it also doesn't let you see into the building, right? It's masking that. And I get all excited when I see this, and my wife has no idea why. And I explained this is one of those new marijuana dispensary things, right? Like this was back when things were changing again in our culture here in California, as well as the rest of the country, where the idea of medical marijuana, that was like in '96. I think we passed that into law, but it was a complicated thing. And if you actually wanted to be able to get medical marijuana, it was a whole deal, and you could still be arrested and so on. And then it was like in the early 2000s, things started changing, and you started to see these things pop up, the dispensary idea, but they were all it was questionable as to whether they were legal or not, so they were mysterious. And in looking at this, I instantly saw marijuana. This is a weed shop, totally. And my wife, bless her heart, this is because she's a good person, she didn't see that at all. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, look, it's got dragonflies on it, and it says collective, and it's the green. I'm pointing out these cultural clues. She thinks I'm crazy. As we're getting out of the car, this young couple, they're sitting in a car next to us, and the young woman, she rolls down the window and she asks me, "Hey, excuse me, are you going in there?" And she points to this thing. And I say, "What, to get marijuana? No, we're going antiquing." Really loud, just being a dick. With her, and she, "Oh, okay, okay." And she rolls up the window really quickly. And we go in and we look at our expensive junk. Don't buy a single thing because I don't need a horseshoe that costs $40 or whatever we saw. But then we're done with that and we come back and the kids are still in the car. But as we're gonna leave, we're getting ready to back up, but I have my wife, because I think I didn't even have a cell phone at that point. I don't know. But it's, just take a picture of this because I can talk about this with my students, do this kind of stuff. And so she takes a picture, and that's too much for the poor kids in the car who just, want some drugs, bless their little hearts. And so they see us with the camera and the fact that I was, clearly a square. They speed out of the parking lot when they see us like document it, like we're narcs or whatever. I wanted to shout, no, 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 just a geographer. But yeah, but that's a cultural thing, right? We know what this is, or some of us do, without actually knowing what it is. And at the back of the hotel, too, in the little magazine, they also had this. Like, this was an era of, medical marijuana, like just everywhere. Let's do this. But you couldn't say it. You couldn't say marijuana, pot, weed, whatever you guys are saying these days, grass, jazz cigarettes. I don't know what the hip term is. I'm an old man. But it's this was in the ad, and looking at it, like I knew exactly what it was referring to, but it doesn't actually refer to it, right? Another reason why it's always so great to be in a classroom is to ask you guys, you degenerates, what are we seeing here? And it's so cute because some of the students are like, I don't know. It doesn't say, how do you know? You're confused. Those are the good individuals, the pure ones. And then the rest of you, hooligans, you look at this and like, oh, yeah, and you start pointing out stuff, right? Like you can read through this and see all sorts of stuff. It doesn't say anything about what it is, but it says everything, right? Things like, eighths, right? We don't distribute anything in an eighth. We don't even have to say an eighth of what, right? Is it an eighth of a pound or a liter or, whatever it might be. But we have the idea of the eighths, a wide variety of high quality medications to suit your budgets and needs. Then under that, knowledgeable staff in quotes like that. You can just hear, the potheads saying this stuff. Even it was Senate Bill 420, right? I mean, my goodness, medicinal wellness center, just the green in general, right? Like there's a lot of stuff in there telling you what it is, but only if you know what the signs are, right? Only if you know what you're looking for. So while our culture can really mask a lot of stuff, and it can make it difficult to understand other cultures because we're looking at stuff through our own cultural perspective. At the same time, there's a lot of good stuff we can do, right? There's a lot of stuff we can figure out through our culture, within our own culture, and looking at subcultures and stuff like that. And we want to cultivate that. We want to use that to better understand the world around us, right? And so we'll be getting into that. My geographers, that's our goal here. That's what we're working toward, is a better understanding of the world around us through our own cultural knowledge, as well as learning to think like a geographer. And that's what we're going to get into over these next weeks. Is again, we're not just talking about medical marijuana or toilets or like whatever. We're talking about this stuff like geographers and learning to think about that where question. Where is this stuff happening? Where are we seeing it unfold? Not just the what, right? Or the when or any of that stuff. You dig? Hopefully you dig. All right, that's it for today. We wrap this stuff up. Next time we're going to talk about, I don't even know, whatever we're going to talk about. So don't miss it. It's going to be good. All right? All right, I'll talk to you later.